Hello there, I'm Joanna Trollope and welcome to Waterstones.com, where you can buy a copy of my new paperback, and its title is Friday Nights. It's about female friendship because I think the nature of friendship, particularly among women, has changed recently. In the past, when there were enormous families and people were much more static and didn't sort of scatter around the world the way they do now, you tended to make friends out of your family because those were the people who were close to you. But now, because we are so scattered, you tend to make family out of your friends. And women do particularly. I mean, if you think of the number of young women you know who talk about their best friends far more warmly and intimately than they even talk about their sisters. So this is a book about a group of women in West London who form a friendship circle. It's like a book group without the books, really. And it starts with a retired NHS professional called Eleanor. She's never married, she has no children, and she realizes that if she doesn't make an effort with friendship, she's going to have a very, very solitary old age on her own. So she goes out to make friends quite deliberately. And she starts with a couple of single mothers, and then she goes on from there. And this is the story, really, of what happens to the dynamic of this sort of group of women friends, particularly when you just drop one man into the mix. There had to be a man somewhere, didn't there? So this is basically the story of Friday Nights. And the research for it took me into two areas of life I'd never really taken on board before. And one of them, I have to tell you, is going to be a lifelong passion. And that is Premier League football. I needed a scene at a football game in the course of this book, as those of you who read it will discover. So I went along in the spirit of research, really, to my local football ground in West London. Yes, you can guess, Stamford Bridge. And I thought it was just going to be an afternoon's research with a pad and a pen. And I think it's going to be a lifelong love affair. I am completely addicted. And the other element I needed for this book, which I'd never done before, was clubbing. Well, obviously, you can see I'm decades too old to go clubbing. But the youngest member of this friendship circle is a girl called Jules, who is an aspiring disc jockey. So I needed to go clubbing to see what her life and her passion for particularly house music was about. So I went clubbing. I don't think I'll do that again, but it was a memorable evening. Anyway, I do hope that those of you who buy this book will really enjoy it, will pass it on to your friends, and will find lots in it that is fuel for conversation and discussion afterwards. I'm going to read a bit of this from this book for you to give you a taste of the story. And I'm going to introduce you to Eleanor, who's the oldest of the group. This is the retired NHS professional. And really, her interaction at the very beginning with the two young single mothers who she sees in her street in Fulham. She sees them trailing up and down with their buggies and their babies, and they never seem to be together. They never have a friend with them. They never have a man with them. And this is really, the paragraphs I'm going to read you are the germ of the story that unfolds after this. Eleanor's house only differed because there were no visible ornaments in it and no fairy lights. There were net curtains at her upper windows, but none at the downstairs ones, which enabled Paula to see that the sitting room contained an upright piano, a very small television, full bookshelves, and a considerable number of piles of papers and magazines. It looked like a man's room, except no man was ever visible. Only an elderly woman, imposing of figure if slightly stooped, with a halo of thick white hair and a walking stick she never seemed to be without. It wasn't a National Health walking stick, Paula observed, not a light tubular metal adjustable affair, but a stout wooden one, with an old-fashioned hooked handle and a fat rubber bung at the end. glimpsing her in her sitting room reading a newspaper with her head thrown back in order to keep her spectacles far enough up her nose to see through, aroused in Paula, irrespective of Eleanor's age or physical condition or solitariness, a sharp jealousy of her complete absorption. Eleanor never looked as if she was yearning. She never looked as if she was raging at her life for not feeding her with more than measly morsels. Unlike the girl Paula sometimes saw in the grocer and newsagents on the corner. She was a thin girl with sharp features and large eyes who wore her poker-straight hair tied back in a high ponytail. The things that Paula noticed about her were the bruise-coloured shadows under her eyes, the fact that she was never without a baby in a pram, and her air of desperation. She didn't look to Paula like someone who was longing for life to bloom into something rich and rare, but more like someone who was unable to see that life could possibly offer such potential. Their eyes met briefly, occasionally, as they paid for their small and unremarkable purchases, but they managed never actually to say anything to one another. And as the habit of silence is as engrossing in the end as the habit of speaking, their not speaking wasn't even an embarrassment. It might, Paula thought later, have gone on forever, meeting in the shop, passing on the street without speaking, if Eleanor hadn't intervened. I'd like to tell you just a tiny and I hope tantalizing bit about the novel that is just over half written at the moment. It'll be out in hardback early in 2010. Very exciting. It's called The Piano Man. It takes place partly in London and partly in Newcastle, which I completely fell in love with as a place. And it's about the thorny subject of inheritance. And all I'm going to say about it further is wait and see.